Hi, I'm Nina Cooke, and thank you so much for joining me today for the Entrepreneur's Inner Game podcast. Today, I have a wonderful guest to introduce you to, Steve Olsher. Steve has been an entrepreneur for over 25 years. He's a chairman and founder of Liquor.com, which is an online pioneer who launched on CompuServe's electronic mall back in 1993. He's a New York Times bestselling author of What is Your What? Discover the one amazing thing you were born to do. He's a creator of the New Media Summit, host of the #1 rated show podcast, Reinvention Radio, an international keynote speaker, and an in-demand media guest who has appeared on CNN, The Huffington Post, and the cover of Founder magazine and countless other media outlets. Steve, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Steve, this is all about mindset. My audience are business owners. They want to grow their business, but something holds them back, and it's their thinking. So I'd love to find out how you have come to be the successful entrepreneur you are and what role mindset has played in your growth.
Yeah, I wish I could just chalk it up and say this is exactly the reasons why, but I think as it relates to mindset, because mindset kind of takes some of the other factors out of the equation, like luck and timing and those sort of things, that mindset really has no control over. Although I will say that from a mindset standpoint, timing, I do think actually is something that you can really leverage in terms of you've got to have vision around things. You got to be able to see what's coming and have the mindset to jump in before other people do. So maybe timing actually is a reflection of mindset then. I guess I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, because reality is it's like, you can look at the recent run up in crypto as an example, right? And the mindset of those who made the most money in that explosion really required them to say, yeah, I believe in the fundamentals that I'm seeing. I believe in the power of this currency. I believe in the power of this opportunity. I'm going to jump in when other people are saying I'm crazy. So yeah, I guess from that standpoint, I guess that has worked in my favor from a mindset perspective, because I've always been pretty early on into things. Although on the flip side of that, sometimes I've bailed before the real growth has occurred. Like you said, I launched on CompuServe's electronic mall in '93. So I've been online now for over 25 years, and launched a fully functional e-commerce site in '95, right around the same time Amazon did. And so, it's I think that's been a big part of it from a mindset perspective, is just being willing to jump in when others have access to a lot of the same data, right? I mean, it's not like I've got access to private secret data that other people don't, but just being willing to jump while other people kind of just sit on the sidelines and wait for the masses to say, yeah, okay, let's get into this thing. It's time.
So what's the difference, Steve? You jumped in. What's the difference between your mindset and taking advantage of an opportunity? And what's the difference between the people's mindsets who sit on the sidelines, who are watching and waiting and thinking, well, I can't do that, other people can, but for me, that just seems too dangerous. And maybe they're thinking, who am I to do that? I'm not good enough.
Yeah, I really just think it boils down to an appetite for risk, really. And I don't think there's any issue at all with waiting for more of what I might call mass acceptance before you jump into something. You're just going to leave a certain amount of profits on the table. I mean, you can still make a ton of money without being the first into something, or the second or the third or even the 10th. I mean, you look at someone like an Elon Musk with electric cars. I mean, I don't know what, the 100th person to try to put together a decent sized electric car company. I mean, this is not a new concept. So the appetite for risk has to be balanced with your appetite for being a first mover. And when you're a first mover, you're going to have a much higher degree of risk, but of course you're going to have a much higher degree of potential reward. And my appetite for risk has always been closer. So if we're kind of looking at a bar graph, I'm kind of closer to the side of high risk than low risk. So I've always been willing to take a bigger risk, and sometimes it's paid off, and other times it hasn't.
And what's your thinking around taking a risk? How do you weigh it up?
Well, there's two ways to look at it. One is how far can you go forward and how far can you go backwards? And I think, when you look at risk and what you're putting at risk, a lot of it depends on how far. So especially when you're younger, it is certainly a reflection of how far back can you fall. In other words, if you've gone out into the world and you've made $100 million and you're putting $100 million at risk, that's a pretty far way to fall, versus if you've gone out into the world and you're just, kind of really getting started with things, and you've built up an empire of all the $1,000 in your bank account. There's really not that much farther to fall, right? So I do think that it is at different stages of our lives, we're going to be amenable to different levels of risk. And reality is, as we get older, we begin to appreciate how hard it is to really earn and keep what you earn. And the idea of working hard to the day we die is not really appealing for most. We'd love to be able to, for most, love to be able to relax and enjoy the fruits of our labor. So I do think that there's something to be said for where you are on your career trajectory in terms of your appetite for risk. And certainly for me earlier on, my appetite for risk was much, much, much higher. But I still think you can accomplish amazing things without having to risk it all and put it all on the line. You just get smarter about how to protect what you have and separate what you have from any sort of new initiative or new endeavor.
And what do you think is the secret of success for business owners, especially when they're smaller business owners or medium-sized? How do they get to their next level of growth?
Well, I think I wouldn't boil it down to one thing so much as I would say that there's probably a few key factors. One is certainly perseverance. Because reality is, it's just like, so I've been doing podcasting since 2009. Took some time off here and there, and mostly on for the last 3 years. And the God's honest truth is that when I started in 2009, there wasn't a heck of a lot of shows that were being produced. But as you look back on that medium and what's happened to it, you can see it's kind of hit this hockey stick type approach where the growth has been pretty tremendous over the last few years. So the point being, had I stayed with it from 2009 to this day, I'd probably be in a much different space with my show. But because of the ebbs and the flows and so on, we've got a good show. We've got good, decent sized listenership, and we love our audience. But reality is that most people who start in podcasting end up succumbing to what they call pod fade, which is an actual term for people who start a podcast and then never get back to it, and they stop. So they do on average about 9 episodes, and then they stop. So that degree of perseverance that's a perfect example of one of those times where I got back into it and have continued to persevere. But you get sidetracked. But I think staying the course and persevering when you know that this is a good opportunity, and listening to that gut, and just riding out the times where the numbers may not be exactly where you want to be, but you believe in your heart of hearts you're putting out good content, or you've created a good widget or whatever it is, and you just ride out that cycle. So perseverance, I think, is got to be top on that list, as well as guidance, right? You can't underestimate the power of working with someone who helps to shorten your learning curve, and who has endured the trials and the tribulations and the brain damages that go hand in hand with trying to do this on your own. And you have to be willing to invest, right? So whether it's investing in guidance, or investing in personnel, or investing in resources or tools or whatever it is. There's been a million different people who have said this in a million different ways, but one of the expressions or mantras that I really certainly subscribe to, and I think is spot on, is the fact that a real business is born the moment a business owner invests in that business, right? And a lot of us today see this laptop lifestyle, and we just think we can put up some content, and we'll have a $1 million business before we know it. And the reality is, it just doesn't work that way, and you have to be willing to invest in that business.
Yes, I think many business owners, they think we're leaving corporate life where we were shackled, and we're going to start off this freedom-based lifestyle, working from home and being able to spend more time with the family. And after a few years, they're thinking, actually, it's not easy. I'm working my guts out, and I'm really not getting the rewards that I thought I would. Yeah, and that's a hard place to be, isn't it? To keep going from that place.
It is. And, I was just having a conversation with a woman yesterday who was talking about how she left her very lucrative corporate life career and wanted to get out from sort of that cubicle hell, if you will, and being tied to being at a particular place at a particular time, and wanted to go out on her own and fend for herself in this entrepreneurial struggle. And a couple of years later now, I mean, she's realized, it's hard to replicate the income that you have when someone's cutting you a check week in and week out. And reality is, for a lot of folks, that when they leave their 9 to 5, work stops and they can come home and be with their family. Whereas for the solopreneurs and the hustle economy, if you will, the gig economy that we're in right now, it never stops. You're just always on the email. You're always on the phone. You're always creating content. You're always doing whatever it is that you're doing related to your business. And you actually end up spending less time with the family that you left that job to be with.
It's ironic, isn't it?
It is ironic.
Yeah. And when you've had a setback, when things haven't worked out as you hoped they would, how have you picked yourself up and kept going?
Ooh, I my wife will tell you that I wallow too much in the misses and don't savor enough of the successes. I am very guilty of that. I mean, I still think about the misses quite often. I mean, I did real estate development for a number of years and built up a pretty big portfolio of over $50 million in property. And things were going really good, and the crash came, and I got caught up in the rest of that and ended up getting hammered in a few of those. And I look back on the portfolio of property that I had, and it's like, man, that was a really impressive book of buildings. I mean, it's like, these were great. I would love to have these buildings now, right? And so I'm not going to be the one to sit here and tell you that I don't look back. I mean, we had the company that we launched on CompuServe's Electronic Mall. We had the S1 filed here in the States to take that company public in March of 2000. And that's when everything imploded in the .com world. And so, there were I left a lot of zeros on the table in that junction. I mean, it's like, I look back on that, and it's like, it still gets my goat. But reality is, you got to keep the lights on, and you got to keep the food on the table for the family, and you got to take care of the bills. You got to do what you got to do. So I think that there's a big part of me that looks back and tries to remember those things so I can learn from them. But at the same token, it just, once you're sort of set on fire, if you will, with that entrepreneurial spirit, it's kind of hard to quench, and you'll find something else. You'll find the next big thing for you.
No, that's so true, because it's easy to take those memories and let them cause fear in your mind that can stop you from trying something new again, and just stay very much in your comfort zone, play small, stay safe, because you've had your fingers burnt. But that wasn't the case for you, was it? It didn't do that for you.
Well, interestingly enough, because of some fairly aggressive moves and not being willing to just sit there and kind of wallow in everything that happened, the .com that I mentioned, that we had the S1 filed and were ready to go public before that whole implosion, and then losing everything that we had related to that company after 9 years of building it, and even losing the domain, the liquor.com domain. I was actually able to get that domain back through a series of very interesting events in 2005, 2006. And so had I not been willing to persevere and not been willing to take some unorthodox actions, I never would have gotten that domain back, and actually still am involved now in this new iteration of the company to this day. But I do think at some point you've got to figure out what your path is and what race you're going to run, right? And there may be some turns on that track that other people just don't make. And ultimately, I think we can all see what we believe or what we want the finish line to be, but how we get there is needless to say very, very different for every entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's quite a journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we do have a choice about which path we follow, because sometimes it seems that we're backed into a corner and we can't do anything about it, but there's always a choice in every moment. When it comes to making decisions, big decisions, how do you make your decisions? How do you get clear about what it is you want to do?
Yeah, and I will tell you that we just had a group of our private clients here in San Diego, and one of the big words over the few days that we had together was choose. Because I think that's what ends up happening for so many entrepreneurs, is they get caught up in this entrepreneurial overwhelm of just having so many options in terms of what we can do and all the things that we're being told that we need to do. And it becomes overwhelming. And it's just, you almost become paralyzed because there's so much to do that you get in that ball, and it's just like, geez, I just don't even know where to start. And you just start throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. And it's just kind of this hodgepodge, this tapestry that just doesn't work. But what I have found works for me is, so you mentioned the book that I put on the New York Times list, which is called What Is Your What? Discover the One Amazing Thing You Were Born to Do. One of the sections of the book is dedicated to what I call the 7 life-altering principles. Basically, just those principles give you the strength and foundation with which to live powerfully. Because we do a lot of things in school, but we don't really teach our kids how to live. None of us really learned in our generation really learned how to live powerfully. And so the 7 life-altering principles capture some of what I use in my own life to make powerful decisions and live from that place of power. One of those principles is what I call the principle of YANO, which is YANO, really just a fancy way of saying yes, no. And it's really about recognizing when you're faced with a moment of truth where a yes decision leads you in one very specific direction down a very specific path, and a no decision leads you down another. And what we tend to do, especially as entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small business owners, et cetera, is we tend to lose sight of when we're faced with those YANO moments. It's like we just kind of blow through those moments, and we don't really give meaningful consideration to how a yes or a no will impact us on our way towards achieving whatever our current ultimate objective is. And so, like, doing this interview is an example of a YANO moment, right? I mean, when you asked me to do this, I could have just blindly said yes and just responded, and or I could have just blindly said no and just but without giving it much thought. It's almost like a crack in the sidewalk. You just kind of step over it without really looking at or thinking about what you might be stepping into on the other side of that. But when we take that step back and we pause and we look at this as a true YANO moment, and some YANO moments are big, like, do I want to take out this line of credit and then put $100,000 out, or 50,000 pounds, or whatever it might be to finance it? I'm like, it's a pretty big YANO moment, right? So that's one of the things that I've implemented in my life to help make powerful decisions where I at least recognize that this is a yay no moment. I still might make the wrong decision, but at least I recognize that, this is a yay no moment, and I have to at least give meaningful consideration to whether or not I say yes or no. And I just don't see a lot of people doing that.
It's bringing awareness into the moment, isn't it? Rather than just rushing through it and not realizing that this was a moment to consider, to stop and consider.
Absolutely.
What's your number one mindset tip you can share with our listeners that they can move forward with their business, get more momentum?
Yeah, mindset to me is really a matter of, as it relates to business, it's really a matter of having something that truly puts fire in your soul. And when you're clear on what makes you jump out of bed with fire every single day, and you just don't have enough hours in that day to get done what you've got to get done, then you're probably on the right path. So I mean, to me, mindset is really just a reflection of having that, what, right? What is your what, right? That's what I call it. And having that fire for what it is that you're doing. Because if you have that fire and you have that long-term vision for what it is that you want to do, you can work backwards from that vision into action steps that you can take today. And when you're clear on what those action steps are and what your profit path is, as I call it, then it's much easier to make decisions. It's much easier to have the right mindset around, hey, this is what I've got to get done today, as opposed to just kind of flying in the dark and, seeing that shiny object and chasing it, and because you think that might be the solution. The mindset around all of this really just involves having clarity around what your ultimate objective is and working backwards from that to take the right steps on the path and bring what truly puts fire in your soul to fruition. And I think if you have that, then the mindset around perseverance and around making good choices and taking smart actions, I do think it all begins to fall into place.
Yeah, I completely agree. And when I found my big why, things really started moving forward for me, and it just makes everything much, much simpler and clearer.
For sure.
How can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
So there's a couple of ways. We mentioned the fact that I've done podcasting for a number of years. So I'd say take a listen to Reinvention Radio, which is our main show. We have another show that focuses on entrepreneurs who have exited for more than 10 million or currently run $10 million plus businesses, called the Best Business Podcast. So we've got those two shows. But steveolsher.com, OLSHER.com is probably the best place to start.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all your wisdom. And for everyone who's been listening, I hope you got a great deal from this, and hopefully see you soon again. See you soon. And until then, bye-bye for now.